Oh, yeah, baby. Welcome to the Doug Rice Show. I am Doug Rice, the one and only, sponsored and brought to you by Twitware. Welcome, one and all. Yes, there's no going to be the singing and the dancing and the yelling. I'll tell you something about the intro as we go forward. Again, thank you. Good morning, folks, for being here. I'm Doug Rice. Welcome to the Doug Rice Show. And a lot of things are going to be updating, improving the format, the delivery. All of it will be honed to a perfect point. And hopefully you will come along for the ride, because I intend to take everyone willing to go. All right, so welcome to the Doug Rice Show. It is 8:01 in the morning. It is the 8th of November, and they had yesterday's elections. They did. And a brother that was running for governor lost badly, which I'm glad to report to you. We are going to cover an outstanding topic today. I think one that all of us need to pay attention to, especially with all that's going on in the world involving those that claim to be Jews but are not. And if you've not looked at the news today, folks, you have missed quite a show. They are improving on their ability to create death and destruction everywhere they go. And I'd like to, just point out that these are the people that the entire world came to the rescue of to extract from the ovens that they were being put in by Aryans. Yeah, this is going to be one of those shows, folks. I'm not here to play games. I'm not here to tug at the heartstrings of folks who may want to get along. I'm interested in simply getting on. So, welcome to the Doug Rice Show. Please do me a favor: like, subscribe, share. I'm gonna put some of the stuff down there for you to do it. And again, you see, twitware.com, 10% off of some of the best stuff you can imagine. Let me show you a little bit about what he has to offer, as this effort is being brought by Twitware. Twitware.com. The apparel, the fabric, the quality of the fabric is what most impresses me. I have been sent some of his attire, and shortly you will be seeing me in the attire at all times as I am on this show, brought to you by Twitware, twitware.com. Use the promo code TDRS and you can save 10% off all products on twitware.com. It is an amazing effort, and I do want to tell you, yesterday I had the experience of solidifying for me that my association now will be restricted in all parts to woke Negroes, folks that understand where we fit in the scheme of things that is the America that we are trapped within. And so that has now been a determining factor for my association. I'll relay to you my experience yesterday, but while I'm still on it, please go to twitware.com, get 10%, support this woke Hebrew. And I think you'll get some good clothing out of it as well. All right, so there we go. How is everyone? I hope everybody's doing well. I do need you to understand this is a one person run show, in that I'm doing all the graphics and hopefully as things improve, that too will improve, as well as my YouTube channel. We're going to be doing some 10-minute moments. I hope you caught a couple of them yesterday. They were just the first two. I've gotten some interesting feedback on both of them too. So we're going to improve the quality. We're going to improve the delivery. And we're going to be as measured as possible in what we say, how we say it from this point forward. Let me tell you why. Things are getting serious. Things are getting serious. And it appears almost that it involves everybody but Negro. Nothing could be further from the truth, let me tell you. The, the, the turmoil that you see going on every day on this planet, starting in 2019, is a direct result of the displacement of God's chosen people so long ago. That promised punishment that we are at the end of, nearing our exodus from this place. And I might add as well, for those of you that somehow may get the idea we're trying to build legacies and plant flags, no, we're trying to keep our Negro heads above water for as long as it takes for the second exodus to take place. That's what we're doing. So I wanted to give you that, if I might. Please, if you would, like, subscribe, share this live. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Doug Rice. This is the Doug Rice Show, brought to you by Twidwear, the highest quality sports apparel I've ever felt in my life. When you touch the material, you're going to know. You got to order it to know for sure. Okay. All right. So there we go. Now, today, as we reflect on the current events going on in Israel, as we see the increase in violence, I guess the refusal of Netanyahu to do anything unless hostages are released. Let me speak on that for just a minute, because I find it interesting. After you have killed over 10,000 Palestinians that had nothing to do with bombing you, but had everything to do with putting Negroes into slavery, and so that's the reason they're suffering through this, I suspect. Yes, I will never let that rest. And so as those individuals who purportedly really gave traction to the transatlantic slave trade suffer through all they suffer through, it still puzzles me that Netanyahu would expect that after killing 10,000 Palestinians, Arabs, I don't know why we keep calling them Palestinians, Muslims, after killing so many, he would expect at this point to offer a ceasefire that would allow the hostages, what remain, to be extracted. I think we're well beyond that, Netanyahu. And as we're on the topic of this man who leads this nation into oblivion, understand that Netanyahu was found guilty of being a corrupt politician. And the entire Knesset, which is the governing body of Israel, is a right-wing, white nationalist group of people who think they're superior. And if you don't believe that, Negroes, if you don't think what I'm telling you is the truth, do this. Go take a look at the Talmud. Go take a glance at the Talmud. Go take a look at what these people believe. And then maybe you'll understand why the sentiment is held against them so closely. As I've said before in some of my posts, they seem to draw hate toward them. I didn't understand until I read the Talmud and some of the histories, practices, their origins. I mean, we can wax on philosophically for hours about what's happening with the current structure of the state of Israel. We can talk about their history, but let's discuss instead Black prisoners and punishment in a racist capitalist society. Here's the reason it's important. While they go about enforcing their claim to be native to the land of Palestine, we, trapped within the confines of this cacophony of caucasity, find ourselves locked away in prisons. The highest population of prisoners resolves right here in the United States, and of that population, the demographics that make up Negroes. It's an interesting fact that after we were released from the plantation, we've never been freed. They took about renaming slavery as, kind of a prisoner exchange. So if you were caught off guard, if you were caught out of pocket out there walking around, they could simply lock you up for vagrancy and put you back in slavery. And so while we suffer that here, while we have to, endure the legacy that has left Negroes, They fight for something they claim is theirs and is not, and is so closely associated with us. The dividing line can't be seen unless closely looked into. You can't see it unless you look at it. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look right at it. And again, thank you for showing up. Thank you for being here. Doug Rice Show will be evolving into a more disciplined way of delivering you information. And I'm only hoping that you might grow the population of this station. You do that by hitting the like, hitting the subscribe. I don't know about that notification bill. I'm still, the jury's still out on that. Okay, anyway, so here we go. Let's take a look at today's offering, shall we? Here it is. How capitalism underdeveloped Black America. Now, Black America, that's the coined phrase that we all sit under in this country. But what does it mean, really? What does it mean to be a Black American, really? Well, we're going to look into a single chapter of this publication. We're going to find out. I'm going to deliver, I hope, the news. All right, so bear with me. So there are several chapters in this particular publication I will be more than happy to go over with you, and also understand I'm willing to take suggestions. If you have a PDF or have something, a reading, a review that you would like me to go through, well, let Detrina know in the chat, and that'll be that. All right, so some of the offerings here, very, very interesting. How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America, Critical Reassessment. You know, we're in here. You know, we're trapped in here. We're no less trapped than the Palestinians trapped in Gaza. We're no less confined as Negroes than those that sit in the West Bank. And they suffer the same kind of capitalistic, colonialistic oppression brought upon the enforcement of white presence. Only in this instance, it's reversed. The presence is put upon us through our relocation. In that instance, the relocation has brought about their presence. But I digress, let's move forward. There are just a few principal chapters in this book that I'd like to go over. The crisis of the Black working class, the Black poor, highest stage of underachievers. Interesting. Groundings with my sisters, patriarchy, the exploitation of Black women. That in itself is a chapter that we should investigate. And let me move the time that I'm on. As you can see, I'm the only one doing this. So bear with me, folks. It's just a matter of paying attention. There you go. It's moved out your way. All right. We also have here section 2, beyond our topic, the Black elite, the domestic core. Very rarely is the Black elite discussed. The bulls of this nation who think they have firm entrenchment in the American dream are soon to wake into the American nightmare, because they're about to take complete control of all of your finances, your ability to buy, sell. By the flip of a switch, they're going to get you in line. And I hope that's something that's on their minds. I do indeed. So continuing, hopefully we get that continuance going there. Hold on. Boom. There we go. So we're going to go into this particular offering. And again, I'm the only one doing this, so bear with me. Oh, hopefully. Oh, there we go. Oh, okay. I got this. On with the show. So this is chapter 4 of this particular offering. This is what we're going to go over. I want you to consider carefully everything that we read here. I think this is information Negroes need to hear. Okay, so here we go. The Negro race. Again, the title of this chapter, the title of the show, Black Prisoners in Punishment in a Racist Capitalist State. I said society. All right. The Negro race has been excluded from civilized governments and the family of nations and doomed to slavery. The unhappy black race was separated from the white race by indelible marks and were never thought of or spoken of except as property. And when the claims of the owner or the profit of the trader were supposed to need protection, that's it. That's the only time we were thought. Negroes were beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. Well, that's a nice opening salvo into what these individuals expect of us. Needless to say, you know, they set the tone, don't they? They do indeed. They set the tone, and it's the reason I suggest we leave them alone. All right, here we go. Bear with me one moment. I'm just switching something around. This is the first show. We're kind of getting this down, so hopefully you guys can stick with me. All right, so a few filler pages and we get to the main point. Please like, subscribe, and share, and let's get some bodies in this joint. All right, here we go. The black domestic periphery in America is essentially imprisoned behind the walls of poverty, sexism, unemployment, and workplace exploitation. Sometimes the barriers to freedom seem very real, as we observe a police assault against a random black victim. At other moments, they seem quite abstract. American democracy has, at its certain stages, relished in its passion for racist violence, and at other times, paternalistically yielded to the demands of black and white reformers. The Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts thus replaced the Jim Crow signs and the legal stigma of second-class citizenship. But equal opportunity programs and affirmative action did not and could not obscure the brutal realities of prison life to those who were exploited. The black majority in America is accepted in the lowest paying jobs, tolerated in public housing, and allowed to join the unemployment lines, but is still barred from effective power within the corporate and political ruling class. Black workers experience workplace exploitation and racist assaults against their humanity. Recognizing that this country's basic democratic creed of rule by law somehow does not apply to them. But it is necessary at this point to describe how this bizarre juxtaposition of public rights and private brutalities, of democracy and racism, comprises no aberration, but a system to facilitate oppression and the accumulation of capital from the black masses. Now, I hope you folks have put on your glasses. In that it says, we are subject to a lesser degree of justice in this country, so far as much that it is obvious as they pick our pockets clean. I thought I would throw my little slant on what they might mean. Let's continue. My apologies. But it is necessary at this point, I already read that, I know, sorry about that. I look over and look back, sorry. At the core of the capitalist accumulation process and institutional racism is coercion. American capitalism is preserved by two essential and integral factors: fraud and force. Fraud and force. Fraud is the ideological and cultural hegemony, I'll figure it out, of the capitalist creed. The enterprise is free and competition exists for all in the marketplace, that success is available for all who work hard, accumulate capital, and participate as voters in the electoral process, that democratic government is dependent upon the freedom to own private property. Blacks, Latinos, and white workers are barraged daily with illusions about the inherent justice and equal opportunity within the American system. The educational system, the educational institutions, churches, media, and popular culture, all in their own way participate in creating the logical framework for a system that remains irrational and inhumane. Well, what a bold statement, what a true statement. We are in a petri dish, if you wish. This is an American experiment with us as the lab animals. We're the lab rats. Now we got the men in agreeably white coats that manipulate the lab rats within the scientific framework and experiment quite inhumanely. We're all programmed to follow a certain pattern. They have expectations of each of us. And now, I've heard recently, just this morning, that they're able to compile you as a being and predict what you may do from one moment to another using AI and all these calculations they've now come up with. So understand the experiment that is America doesn't really involve the lab rats. I mean, we're nearly not participants, but I'll leave it at that. All right, here we go. Beneath the velvet glove of fraud exists the iron fist of force. For reasons of history, Black people are more aware than whites of this delicate dichotomy between consensus and coercion. In other words, they are given a choice. We are given what appears to be a choice. Excuse me while I drink. The essence of slavery was coercion of the most primitive kind. The relationships between the master and slave were characterized by mutual distrust, fear, hatred, and undisguised force. All slaves, whether the proverbial Uncle Toms or Nat Turners, recognized that production could not take place without the daily use of physical or psychological violence. Even the most paternalistic master had to divide Black families occasionally or employ the whip to get the crop to market on schedule. See the reasoning? Under industrial capitalism, however, the essence of production involves force of a different kind, the extraction of surplus value from the labor power of the worker. Force is generally disguised within capitalist societies with democratic forms of government. Listen to that statement. Force is generally disguised within capitalistic societies with democratic forms of government. That is the framework within which Negroes sit today. The worker never receives the actual or real value of his or her own labor power, but is technically free to sell his or her skills or services to the highest bidder or employer. Blue collar and service workers are less free than professional workers, but all are forced to accept the conditions of employment that the owners of capital are willing to grant. Capitalists and politicians in bourgeois democracies would prefer to mask their dictatorship over labor through a variety of means. They tolerate and at times even encourage the activities of labor unions so long as profit margins are not reduced seriously. Most public impacting capital are made within the established channels of bourgeois discourse and legitimacy. It is only when a capitalist society is in deep crisis, when the dictatorship over capital, over labor, is questioned or threatened, the capitalists are pressured to employ brute force. The oppressed Black majority is generally more subject to the violence of American capitalism than whites because, one, it is concentrated in the lowest paid, blue-collar, unskilled, and service sectors of the labor force, and two, it comprises a substantial portion of the total U.S. reserve of labor, the last hired and the last hired and the first fired during periodic recessions. And three, it is the historic target of brutality within a racist culture and society, occupying an inferior racial position which has remained unaffected since the demise of slavery. America is not simply a capitalist state, but a racist state. A government apparatus which usually denies access and power to most Blacks solely on the basis of racial background. The capitalist racist state still attempts to resolve problems within the Black community via fraud rather than force, just as it does for whites. Nevertheless, there remains a greater reliance on the omnipresence of coercion aimed at Blacks than at whites, and an even greater use of force aimed at the majority of poor and working class Blacks than at petty bourgeois Blacks. Force is the essence of Black underdevelopment under capitalism. To be Black in capitalist America is to be a prisoner to the reality of coercion. My goodness, how they open up their salvo. I always call that an opening salvo. It establishes where we sit within the frame of this country, where we have always sat. You know, they called it an Emancipation Proclamation. It's almost like your children grow up and you let them out of the house. Now, I don't know if you can equate emancipation with freedom. I don't. I tend not to do that. Freedom is when you have a choice to do what you want to do. And if Negroes wanted to go back to their homeland, well, then that makes emancipation nearly meaningless. You couple that with the fact that we are more prone to be incarcerated within the prison we are incarcerated within. And that kind of doubles and triples the strength of their sin. All right, well, again, folks, I like doing this for my brothers and sisters, and I am vehemently Negro-centric. I support Negro endeavors. I encourage Negroes to excel, all in lieu of our second exodus, as you can tell. So if you do enjoy what I do, please do, if you choose to, give to the edifices you see below and try to support the Doug Rice Show. Like, subscribe, and share too, because that'll help me as well. Here we go. I'm going to go to the section 2 of this offering. Again, Black prisoners and punishment in a racist capitalist society. I said society. I believe he called it someone else, but no matter. Let's move on. Both during and immediately after slavery, whites seldom bothered to imprison Blacks for any real or imagined crime. I want to read that again. Please understand what's on this man's mind. Both during and immediately after slavery, whites seldom bothered to imprison Blacks for any real or imagined crime. First, life in the South was far, for most Blacks, a kind of imprisonment, as it is today for most Blacks in America. No white, whether a drunkard, child molester, or criminal was perceived to be beneath any black person, no matter how upright and financially successful he or she happened to be. The strict racial code was an effective barrier to keep blacks, with rare exceptions, outside positions of power and influence. A salty or sassy black woman who objected to any of the segregation's insanely strict restrictions could be raped by a white man with legal impunity. If her husband, lover, brother, or son had anything to say about the matter, he might be castrated or lynched. Southerners established Negro courts, which were separate from those dealing with whites by the 18th century. Such courts, according to historian Kenneth M. Stamp, were usually less concerned about the formalities of traditional English justice than about speedy verdicts and certain punishments. Slaves charged with petty larceny usually did not appear in courts, but were simply lashed or punished by their owners or overseers. In misdemeanor or non-capital felony offenses, blacks were tried in courts that were, to say the least, highly prejudiced. In Mississippi, for instance, blacks charged with non-capital felonies were tried before 2 justices and 5 slaveholders. That must have been fair. Louisiana blacks in non-capital felonies were judged by 4 slave owners and only 1 justice. Some Southern whites recognized even then that their system of Negro courts was, in the words of one South Carolina judge, the worst system that could be devised. Nevertheless, despite its obvious contradiction, the Negro court system became the basis for allocating, quote unquote, justice in a biracial society. Well, so what have they done? What have they laid a framework for that we are now living through today? I mean, you cannot for a moment think the effects of that have gone away. They've not. The psyche of Negroes in this country are under constant attack. They fight for your attention. They don't want you paying close attention to certain facts. They don't want you to learn like that. And this, what we're talking about, this is some deep information, and it needs to be circulated throughout the Negro nation. So do me a favor. If the Doug Rice Show is your flavor, support the effort that we have put together. We'll be here under stormy weather. I don't know if I can keep going on, but I'll try. Who knows how long. All right, let's move forward, please. Moving on. Except in those circumstances when blacks were accused of assaulting whites or stealing property, the slave owners themselves presided over the majority of cases involving black infractions. Punishment varied from the mundane to the ingenious, huh? What? Now, when they say ingenious, folks, can you imagine what they mean for us? For relatively minor offenses, field hands were forced to labor on Sundays or holidays. Okay, not bad, right? Black foremen were demoted to the status of field hand, and household servants were forced to leave the big house. All right. One tobacco planter in Maryland ordered a slave to eat the worms he failed to pick off the tobacco leaves. These are the people you grin and smile at every day. More serious infractions, such as failure to obey orders, meted out punishments of various kinds. Let's look them over. Some large planters sentenced unruly slaves to spend days or even weeks in the local county jail. Others built jails. I love the boxes. You know, that kind of flows off the tongue if I were to say that, right? On their own plantation, small windowless shacks in which black workers were confined. Now, we saw that in a movie, if I remember. We saw that in Django, right? Did that to Olivia from from that other show. So yeah, they actually did that. They would put them in their own body. Now I want you to imagine you as property. Now, you walk about this country skinning and grinning. Huh? You walk about the country smiling and dialing. You do, don't you? Every time you see one of them, you can't help it. You just show them your pearly whites and emote a warm Negro glow. But the realities of our existence in past times should have something to do with how we act and carry ourselves today. There should be a memory there somewhere that you can grasp and not make go away. They put us in boxes on their own property. I mean, if you do that today, you're considered a Lex, some crazy person, I don't know, Lecter, something like that. Let's see what else they did. I don't know. I just wanted to stop and offer you that. Here we go. Moving on. Nearly every slave at some point in her life, experienced the lash. Although castration was a legal and popular form of punishment in the 18th century, it declined in usage after the 1800s. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? I mean, they stopped mutilating us after 1800. A few planters resorted to the castration of a black male, however, if they desired to take his slave wife. Thought you didn't like black people. Oh, got it. The greatest barrier to the imprisonment and or execution of black people was, ironically, slavery itself. Listen to that statement. The greatest barrier to the imprisonment and or execution of black people was, ironically, slavery itself. Slavery itself. Interesting. It's not logical in the view of most whites for a man to willingly destroy his own property. You liking this? I know I am. Racial atrocities existed in every state and on every plantation. But the loss of a prime field hand meant the loss of a capital investment of some importance. In rare cases, whites did not execute slaves who killed particularly brutal white foremen, especially when the white victims were from the poor, white, or lowest classes. Did you hear that, Negro masses? So if you got in your feelings enough for being whipped all brutal and tough, you could take a life or two as long as the white wasn't too above you. Isn't that something? The masters were racists, but as businessmen, they also had to protect their investment. For these reasons, there were relatively few lynchings, public executions, or imprisonment of blacks prior to the Civil War. As a form of legal chattel, blacks were the beneficiaries of a kind of perverse protection. With the emancipation and Reconstruction came an inevitable reaction in some race relations. Technically, freed from the shackles of bondage, the black man or woman was now just another competitor in the labor market. And that, my friends, is such a true statement. I will pause there for a moment. Let me tell you. When we were emancipated, we've never been freed. When we were emancipated, we did in fact become a competitor to the white race. We became a competitor, that conglomerate of grouped individuals, all from different tribes claiming to be now of one tribe, the white race. How they've decimated themselves. But that aside, we in fact did become competitors in the labor market, but more than that, brothers and sisters, we were more skilled than the average white man or woman because we were doing the work. We've been doing the work for years, all the intricate work that they may have showed us once, and then of course we've had to improve upon. I don't need to talk about the cotton gin and who invented that, nor the numerous other inventions of ingenuity that come to Negro mind under pressure. I mean, we all do it. And those types of things put in the minds of these individuals a competition of kind. And that began Reconstruction and then segregation and then the rest that happened to the Negro nation. That, technically, freed from shackles, we became competitors to our former enslavers. And every time you look in the face of one of their descendants and grin and cheese and massa plea, you're doing nothing but trying to appease their own self-consciousness. I mean, they're very much aware of your Negro presence. Moving on. Okay. White laws had to be altered to compensate for the changing status of Black agricultural workers and partisans, to ensure their continued inferior caste status. In the month of 1865, a series of Black codes, which we will cover, were ratified to guarantee Black labor subservience. Now, if you don't believe that, there it is, subservience. It is important to note, however, that the Jim Crow laws, which imprisoned Blacks for violations, were originally developed in the North, not the South. It's important to note, however, that the Jim Crow laws which imprisoned Blacks for violations were originally developed in the North, not the South, because the South valued us. They didn't want to imprison us for any just little old thing. We had work to do. We also had to dance and sing. Many Northern restaurants, hotels, and taverns were off limits to Blacks throughout the 18th century, 19th century. In North of Slavery, historian Leon Litwack describes the general pattern of race relations in northern states between 790 and 1860. Here we go. Virtually every phase of existence, Negroes found themselves systematically separated from whites. They were either excluded from railway cars, omnibuses, stagecoaches, and steamboats, or assigned to special Jim Crow sections. They sat when permitted in secluded and remote corners of theaters and lecture halls. They could not enter most hotels, restaurants, and resorts, except as servants. They prayed in Negro pews. Negro. They keep calling us Negroes. Why do we run from that? I don't know. In the white churches, and if partaking of the sacrament of the Lord's Prayer, they waited until the whites had been served the bread and wine. Now, is that how it's going in heaven? Is that how it's going to go in heaven? And the white's going to go first, and then the Negro is going to go after? Because let me tell you something, you're incurring my laughter. Moreover, they were often educated in segregated schools, punishment in segregated prisons, nursed in segregated hospitals, and buried in segregated cemeteries. Do you feel welcome, Negro? Do you feel like this is your land, this is my land? Huh? Newspapers and public places prominently displayed cartoons and posters depicting the Negro, us, alleged physical deformities and poking fun at his mannerisms and customs. Children often tormented Negroes in the streets and hurled insulting language and objects at them. Are you happy? Are you smiling? How do you feel right now? I mean, I just read that. This was written in, description by a historian describing northern states, New Jersey, New York, all these places, hey, where they talk, And this is what Negroes, and they called us Negroes. This is what Negroes were relegated to. Now, if that doesn't make us set apart in their mind, it should make you set apart in yours. And what do you think has changed? What do you think is rearranged? Do you actually believe? Do you somehow perceive that things have improved? That somehow the needle's been moved? The needle's gone nowhere. In fact, it's gone backward. Let's continue. Like, subscribe, share. Flex that mental sinew. Many Midwestern states legally excluded anyone with a visible admixture of Negro blood from voting. We voted yesterday, or you guys voted yesterday, or rather they voted yesterday. I haven't voted a day in my life. No cursing. Almost every major white leader of the Republican Party declared his unconditional opposition to Negro equality. White women were not immune from attacking blacks. In Indiana, for instance, a large pre-war political rally was led by a large cadre of young white females who carried a banner reading, "Father, save us from husbands." Well, that's changed. Hasn't that sentiment changed? Indeed. Thus, the postbellum South after 1877 developed its public policies towards the punishment of blacks primarily from the traditions of the customs of the North. You need to hear that again? You do. Thus, the postbellum South after 1877, folks, don't consider 1877 a long time ago. It's not. It's about 3 generations, 4 generations, if it's not. And it developed its public policies towards the punishment of blacks primarily from the traditions and customs of the North. So don't think that somehow Southern states have the cornered the market on how to treat Negroes poorly. It began in the North, for sure. Thus, during this period, the vast majority of Southern blacks were legally imprisoned for 3 general offenses: any violation of segregation codes monitoring public behavior or activity, any violation of laws governing capitalistic agriculture production, and any infraction, misdemeanors, and non-capital felonies against whites. In the first century, the most heinous crime was interracial marriage. The Mississippi Black Code of December 1865 was specific. It shall not be lawful for any freed man, freed Negro, or mulatto to intermarry with any white person, nor any white person to intermarry with any freed man, free Negro, or mulatto, and any person who shall so intermarry shall be deemed guilty of a felony, and on conviction thereof shall be confined in the state penitentiary for life if you marry a Negro. Free Negroes and mulattoes are of pure Negro blood and thus descend from a Negro to the 3rd generation, inconclusive through one ancestor in each generation may have been a white person. I need you to identify closely to that. I'm going to zoom in on that. Can I do it again? I can't. Damn it. I can't win. Hear that. Pure blood. It's in the blood. You can't transfer the promise. You can't transfer the blessing. It's blood related, and I want to read that again before it's abated. Free Negroes and mulattoes are of pure Negro blood. And those descended from a Negro to the 3rd generation, inconclusive through one ancestor in generation, may have been a white person. Well, we'll give you that. But other than that, pure blood. They talked about blood. So in reflection to that, in just relation to that ID, let me try to figure this out here. Who are these clowns in the state of Israel claiming to be? Because it claimed here not too long ago that free Negroes and mulattoes are of pure Negro blood. What's pure Negro blood? That's pure Hebrew blood. That's what that is. Has nothing to do with Khazarians, nothing to do with Israelis, nothing to do with anyone other than Negroes. And they seem hell-bent to the point of putting you in prison for life if you intermarry with one. Oh yeah, this is fun. By the late 1870s, other southern states ratified similar laws calling marriages between the races incestuous and contrary to God's will. Other codes ordered blacks off sidewalks to give way to white men, even segregating certain streets specifically for use by whites only. Coons were legally restricted to keep their distance and mind their language in public gathering places, or they would find themselves behind bars. You know what the laughing barrel is, right? If a Negro found himself finding something funny, he'd have to find that laughing barrel and stick his head in the laughing barrel, and there's where he'd laugh. And do you know why Negro had to do that? Let me tell you why. Because the whites that surrounded them, these weak-minded, lazy specimens, would take umbrage to a Negro laughing in their presence because they're so self-aware, so in their own feelings, that they immediately associate the laughter of a Negro with them being made fun of. And so the punishment for that was so severe, I can't imagine. They instead chose to give a Negro the alternative of sticking his head in a barrel and laughing to get it all out. And you laugh or smile in any of these people's faces. Let's continue. Very interesting. Very interesting. To maintain the inferior position of blacks within agricultural production, Southern whites, if I'm at the right place, yes, I am. Yes. Southern whites developed the peonage system, I don't know how to pronounce that one's interesting. And convict leasing. So there are two systems. Peonage was a logical byproduct of the sharecropping system that replaced slavery immediately after the Civil War. In principle, sharecropping represented a real step forward for black rural workers. An industrious farmer would borrow farm utensils and seeds and would divide the proceeds from the sale of the product at year's end. Some black farmers used the system to accumulate small amounts of capital, eventually buying their own farms. Many bitterly discovered at the end of a harvest that they actually owed more to the white planter than their share of the crop could pay for. Keep smiling. Since virtually all white merchants and planters inflated the cost of their supplies and kept all business records, illiterate black farmers were caught in a never-ending cycle of debt. Peonage occurred only when the planter forbade the cropper to leave the plantation because of debt, writes historian Pete Daniel. A laborer who signed a contract and then abandoned his job could be arrested for a criminal offense. Ultimately, his choice was simple. He could either work out his contract or go to the chain gang. Southern legislatures and courts always sided with owners in their disputes with black sharecroppers. Once convicted of breaking their legal agreements with white planters, black prisoners were sometimes bailed out of jail by other white businessmen, who in turn paid off the blacks' fines and previous debts. Well, we know where this is heading. We know where that's getting. Yet, these blacks were now obliged to labor for their new employer in work gangs for long periods of years, often under the brutal physical conditions you can't imagine. Now, you listen, folks. This is information they don't want in schools. They don't want your children taught this. You will not find this information circulated in curriculums anywhere in this country, I'm sure of it. And I mean from the elementary, certainly, all the way up to college, university level. This kind of information held back from the white nation is some sort of abhorrent creation in their minds. They cannot find the kind of humanity needed to read this completely. They avoid this subject. But we can share this with one another. I encourage you to do so with your sisters and brothers. Do so below. Just like, subscribe, share the Doug Rice Show. Also, remember, we do have a sponsor. I'm going to take a break to get the sponsor a little bit of airtime. I think it's only fair. We are sponsored by Twidwear, and their Twidwear is right there. This guy has worked hard, as I take a break and a pause for the cause, to produce some good quality wear, sports apparel, casual stuff, stuff I think you'll like, stuff that I would buy. It's not expensive. It's high quality, and I'm going to get some very high quality photos that are going to replace these. We've had these for a little while, but still use the promo code right here. Let me pause it a minute right there. Promo code TDRS. And as you can see, it will take that discount amount off TDRS, $5, save you some money. This pullover is very, very nice. The quality, the feel, really, it's a heck of a deal. And I'm Doug Rice. I want you to please go to twidwear.com. Let me put it under here for you. And check out what he has to offer. I have received some of his product, and it is above and beyond the best kind of quality that you can find. And I mean, I love it. Thick, great stuff. Of course, I love blue. Got, of course, you can also buy a shoe, hats. The lineup is much more extensive. And of course, folks, it's not too expensive. Please take a look. I wouldn't want to give it all away here anyway. I mean, not really. You go to the website and check it out yourself. Twidwear.com, TWID. You heard what I said, because that's what I do. All right. Back to the shoe. We're going to get into the slowly evolving information that I see. And it's interesting. They're laying a foundation to tell you how this occurred within this nation, and to read how we were treated, and to think or feel for a moment that the sentiment against us has somehow vanished. It is not. It is being suppressed. It is being held in, but it's being tapped within. Donald Trump is bringing it out again. You know, you got folks like Paul Gosar, Marjorie Taylor Greene, this girl Boebert, all of them are white nationalists. You know what I mean? All of them, to their heart, are racists through and through. And let's not act like we didn't know. All right, so back at it. And again, like, subscribe, share. We're going to go back to the reading, Black Prisoners and Punishment in a Racist Capitalist Society, as we continue. The number of Black prisoners in Southern penitentiaries multiplied dramatically as the profitability of convict leasing became evident to white capitalists and politicians. In Mississippi, the number of state prisons grew from 272 to 1,872 to 1,072 in 1877. All right, I read that wrong. Let's do it again. In Mississippi, the number of state prisons grew from 272 in 1872 to 1,072 in 1877. That's a growth of a lot. That's like 900, 800. That's crazy. Georgia's convict total increased from 432 in 1872. Let me read that right. To 1,441 in 1877. And this explosion of the Black prison population reflected an abrupt alteration of Southern laws. All right? In 1872, Mississippi defined the theft of any property over $10 in value, or any cattle or swine of whatever value, as grand larceny, with the sentence up to 5 years. Laws like this provided the legal foundation for a prison system that made millions of dollars for a small number of white politicians. Colonel Arthur S. Collier, editor of the Nashville American and a prominent Tennessee Democrat, who's also served as director and general counsel for the Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company, was one prominent beneficiary of the leasing program. Let's read this. Under Collier's direction, the Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company leased Black and white convicts to work in their various enterprises for $101,000 annual fee paid to the state. Arrangements like this were common and profitable for a number of reasons. Most states had no health or safety inspectors for the convicts, and 16-hour workdays were not uncommon. Leases to individual mining, railroad, or other individual companies varied from 10 to 30 years. And so each year, 101,000, I mean, that's millions. In that day, hundreds of millions calculated this way. Companies often sublease their convicts to smaller white-owned firms at a profit. Prison wardens also became wealthy from the system, the beneficiary of substantial kickbacks from politicians and company directors. And as they tend to do, as they always do, as they do through and through, they project this truth to us through their mediums, through their movies, through their shows. Shawshank Redemption comes to mind. You know, you play and can replay the showing of all they say. You can see it, and then you can believe it. You know, every Negro has more likely seen Shawshank Redemption. I don't have to bring that to mind, but you know why I mentioned. However, conditions for the prisoners became literally worse than under slavery. However, conditions for the prisoners literally became worse than under slavery. Quite unsavory. Black women who were chained together in straw bunks at night were often raped by white guards. Their children were also confined in the penitentiary with them. The annual death rates for Black convicts ranged from 11% in Mississippi to 25% in Arkansas in the 1880s. One 1887 grand jury study of a Mississippi prison hospital declared that all convicts bore the marks of the most inhuman and brutal treatments. Most of them have their backs cut in great wales, scars and blisters, some with their skin peeling off in pieces as a result of severe beatings. They were lying there dying, some of them on bare boards, so poor and emaciated that their bones almost came through their skin, many complaining for want of food. We actually saw live vermin crawling over their faces, and the little bedding and clothing they have is in tatters and stiff with filth. Now, these people got a whole lot to pay for. Do you think, as we, ancient Hebrews, offered our children to bow over fire, put our children in fire? Yeah, we did that. Do you think that our 400-year punishment, that punishment for that misdeed, is in any way going to be, kind of glossed over in some way, in like kind to what they've done to us? Do you think that if the Creator put us in slavery under these conditions to suffer under the conditions at the hands of these individuals who we know have gone far too far, they've gone beyond the pale of just enslaving a group of people, and they've gone barbaric. They are vile barbarities. And here's the main issue. If given the opportunity, all of these individuals that surround you Negroes, all of these folks that grin and cheese back at you as you try to grin back at them too, all of them have it within them to do exactly what they do. And it only takes a push, the slightest push, to get them going. If you don't believe it, well, let me let you know. Over in Ukraine, what's happening? They're finding large mass graves, 5,000 people just dead, mass graves. That's a practice. That's not indicative of the Negro race. And so all of us sit amongst and amidst individuals who have the proclivity to do these things within them and can be triggered at any moment. If you don't believe me, take a look at some of their children that decide to go on 200-mile drives to take Negroes' lives. All right, let's go. Most of them, yep, I see that. Yep, I see that. Historian Fletcher M. Green described the South's dreaded convict lease system in 1949 as a pattern of labor exploitation akin only to the persecutions of the Middle Asians or in prison camps of Nazi Germany. So they're treating us as badly as they're treating the Jews. Well, that would reason. The general conditions in Southern penitentiaries were, of course, scandalous, or at least should have been. The major prison in Virginia in 1900 was actually designed by Thomas Jefferson in 1797. So the major prison that they were using in the year 1900 was actually designed by Thomas Jefferson in the year 1797. I wonder what the conditions might have been. The decade penitentiary was so overcrowded, according to one Richmond newspaper editor, that the feet of the inmates tended to stick out of the window. Alabama's prisons in the 1880s were packed with several times the number of convicts they could reasonably hold. Even that state's prison inspectors admitted that their penitentiaries are filthy as a rule, and both prisons and prisoners were infested with vermin. The convicts were excessively and sometimes cruelly punished and were poorly clothed and fed. After World War I, conditions for black and white convicts improved somewhat, but the essential brutalities of the penal system remained. Thousands of black peons were routinely ordered to work in county chain gangs on public roads, in work camps, or in turpentine mills and mines. In Forced Labor in the United States, written in 1939, Walter Wilson discovered that chain gangs were a chief means of punishing black and white offenders. Prison camps ranged from portable steel cages to the neat brick and wooden buildings found in the road camps of North Carolina and Virginia. Outside of imprisonment for debts owed to planters, or the recruitment of blacks to replenish the number of convicts leased by counties or states, the frequency of arrests and imprisonments of blacks was relatively low during the period of Jim Crow laws from 1890 to the 1930s. The reasons for this are rooted in the profoundly racist worldview most whites of all classes had adopted by this time. Writing in 1941, sociologists Allison Davis Burleigh and Mary Gardner noted in Deep South that the police, like the whites in general, believe that fighting, drinking, and gambling among Negroes are not crimes so long as they are strictly limited to the Negro group and are kept somewhat under cover. So therein lies the answer as to why Negro communities are so accustomed to being considered crime-ridden. Again, accustomed to be considered, because them telling the tale of our suffering is a lie from the moment their mouths move. The reason I say that is because the origins of our suffering originate with them, and of course that's a fact we can all prove. Continuing, it is only when this behavior is brought about and out into the open and thrust upon the attention of the whites that it becomes a crime for which arrests are made. One white Southern woman of upper-class origins explained to the researchers that we have very little crime. Of course, Negroes knife each other occasionally, but there's very little real crime. I mean, Negroes against whites or whites against each other. That's her definition of crime. The legal system was designed essentially for whites only, as the rest of society. White policemen were encouraged to pick up any Negro whose actions appear suspicious, viciously beating him or her and then releasing the person without charging. Convinced that formal punishments by fine or jail sentence failed to act as deterrents to Negro criminals, law enforcement officials simply kept blacks out of the court system entirely by administering punishments themselves. You need to pay attention to this, Negroes. Most Southern white police patrolmen lived in working class neighborhoods with blacks as neighbors, and a number of them have kept Negro women, usually on a more or less temporary arrangement, and are on a friendly footing with Negro proprietors of legal establishments. Whites were also absolutely convinced that they could judge a bad simply by his or her appearance. Did you hear that? Blacks were thought to be inherently so stupid that they would readily admit to any infraction they had committed when confronted by white authority. If blacks were arrested by police for any minor or major crimes against whites, however, their eventual conviction and imprisonment were a foregone conclusion. As Deep South explains, and listen carefully, the Negro is from the very beginning in a position of subordinate to both the police and the court. His testimony will not be accepted if contradictory to that of the police. His witnesses carry little weight with the court, and he can wield no political influence. The Negro is less apt to have legal assistance in the police court or to appeal his case to the higher courts. Negroes seldom prefer charges against whites. The police usually discourage such actions, and in trying such cases, the court protects the whites by technicalities and by attacking the truth of the Negro testimony. There are no Negro officers, judges, lawyers, or jurymen. The only role a Negro can take is that of defendant or witness, except in a few types of civil cases. Furthermore, the Negro has no part in making laws which the court system enforces. Well, as a defendant, he faces the white man's court. He is tried not only on the evidence, but also on the basis of the white man's concept of how a Negro would or should act. If he is found guilty, his sentence and punishment are determined by the same factors. The law is white. And there we find ourselves being considered Negroes throughout this writing, Deep South. I don't know why we are so terrified to let the word Negro come out of our mouth. I just don't know. I see it as a proud witness to what we have been through and endured. This is interesting stuff, folks. Please do me a favor, like, subscribe, share, give to the Doug Rice Show. There it is down there. I'm going to finish this section and then we'll be gone. But my goodness, this is a pretty good reading. Like and subscribe. Let's see it. Interesting stuff. Beyond the peonage, and I keep saying peonage, pawnage. I'm going to say pawnage, and convict leasing, behind the racist and undemocratic white court system, and beyond all the powers of the brutal white police rested what could be termed the great deterrent to black crime, lynching. The segregationist South was steeped in violence. C. Van Woodward documents that Alabama whites actually spent more money for rifles and pistols than they did for the state's entire supply of farming implements and tools. Into the 20th century, white men often wore loaded revolvers in banks, courtrooms, and schoolhouses, as well as in bars and gin houses. The reason is they're scared all the time. They're terrified of payback. Let's just call it what it is. They walk around surrounded by people they've done wrong, and they wonder just how long it might be before they're singing a different song. That's what's going on. Whites shot each other over the most absurdly trivial reasons. In 1923, 13 of the 15 cities with the highest homicide rates were southern or border cities. The national homicide rate of 1926, 10.1% per 100,000, favorably contrasts with Jacksonville, Florida's 75.9 per thousand, Birmingham's 58.8 per thousand, 42.4 per thousand, and Nashville's 29.2 per thousand that year. So that's how many homicides per thousand in those states. White folks were killing each other. If whites in the South had few reservations about resorting to violence against each other, then the courts and police did little to protect blacks from the wrath of that same violence. Blacks and whites alike understood that there were three crimes which would swiftly spark the flames of racist coercion: the killing or wounding of any white man, the real or suspected sexual assault against any white female, and perhaps the most serious offense of all, any overt political activity which challenged Jim Crow and segregation and the basic system of caste and class rule upon which the entire economy and social order was based. Upon these acts, the massive weight of white vigilante justice would fall heavily upon any black man or woman. No real trial would be held. No jail or state penitentiary would be secure enough to keep the black man or woman from his certain fate. Lynching was the ultimate weapon used by whites to keep us in our place. All right, folks, aside the jokes, I am very happy to bring you this offering. I think we had a keen insight into black prisoners and punishment, where it began, how it evolved, and where it did land, and the problem's not solved. The only way to solve this problem is to be released from our captivity. That's it. There's no other solution. And so I leave you with that. I hope and pray that you go with the Most High today, and also you share, like, and subscribe to the show. This will be a more disciplined delivery, a more predicated on the needs of our sponsors, who of course have to look after their brand. That brand, as we know, is Twidware. Twidware is what brought you this today, this fair. And, going out, I might as well give a shout out. I want this shirt. I want to know that. I want this shirt. Twid, if you're listening, I want this shirt. I like this shirt. Again, Twidware is our sponsor, the official sponsor of the Doug Rice Show. The Doug Rice Show is now brought to you by Twidware. It's an exclusivity that we now share. And again, I'd love for you to go to twidware.com after the show. Register, give him your email address, do all the things that you would do for all the name brands that you wear. But go to twidware.com and check out his brand. All right, I got to go, folks. I'm pretty worn. And you're going to hear more from me today. The day is still dawning. I'm still producing. I'm going to produce content. We have 10-minute segments that will be produced. And those segments might expand or reduce. I don't know. It all depends. But I do appreciate your ear, and I appreciate you being here. I'm Doug Rice. This is Doug Rice Show. And before I go, I know that most of you who look at this show expect me to do certain things every day. But I got to tell you, I got to do a little bit of variance. So there are a few different things that I'll say. Now, Twidware, Twid stands for That's What I Do. So you heard what I said, because that's what I do. But if I go through the show and call it through without at least expressing to you the need to do at least one or two things, if you've got to be out there in public places, I'm going to say it, get that goddamn grin off your faces. All right, folks, that's the show. Like, subscribe, and share. You have a wonderful day. There it is right there.